Okay, today we're going to learn how to solve equations, quadratic equations by factoring. The very first thing that you have to make sure of is that the equation is in standard form. So as a reminder, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, okay? So we can see that example 1 is in standard form. And so the next thing that we'll do is we will factor the left side. So this is a basic trinomial. So this will be a real easy factoring for us. And the factors would be x minus 3 and x minus 6. So I still encourage you to make sure, to make sure that it works by doing your mental checks in the inner and the outer, because you don't want to have, if you got this wrong, there's no way you're going to get the right answers in the end. All right, once you have it factored completely, the next step is to use the zero product property and solve for the variables. So by the zero product property, if this times this equals 0, one of them must be 0. So either x minus 3 equals 0 or x minus 6 equals 0. So x is either 3 or 6. And then we're going to write our answers in set notation using braces. And those are the solutions. Again, you can always check your solutions by picking one, plugging it in, and making sure that it works. All right, example 2. We can see that this is not in standard form, so that's the very first thing we're going to need to do. And the way that we would get it into standard form, the easiest way is just to add the 7x to the other side. So that would give us negative x squared plus 7x plus 8 equals 0. Now remember, you always, standard form is, the x squared term comes first, the x term comes next, and then the constant term. So that's why I ordered it the way that I did. All right, from here, now we're going to factor, and we have to have it factored completely. So just like with all factoring, we check to see if there's a GCF. And we also need to make sure that our first term's coefficient is positive. And they don't have a GCF, but we have to factor out a negative because the first term has a negative coefficient. So we would do negative 1 times the quantity x squared minus 7x minus 8 equals 0. All right, now we're ready to continue factoring. This is another basic. So we would have negative 1, set up our two parentheses, x here, and then we need to figure out what do we multiply to get negative 8, and then add and get negative 7x. And that would be minus 8 plus 1. Again, I would encourage to do a quick mental check to make sure that you have the correct factors. And then we apply the zero product property. I'll call it the ZPP so I don't have to write so much. So this times this equals 0. Well, there's no way that negative 1 is 0. Okay, so it's got to be one of these two quantities. So either x minus 8 is 0 or x plus 1 is 0. And then write your answer using braces. Set notation. Remember, these are two separate answers. It's not an ordered pair. If you're checking one, you check one at a time. Okay? All right, our third example. Again, here the first step is we need to write it in standard form. Since x squared is positive, I'm going to move the 2x over by subtracting it from each side, and that'll give me x squared minus 2x equals 0. So we are in standard form at this point. We don't have a constant term, okay? But it's not a simple quadratic because we do have this x term. So that's why it would fall into solving by factoring, because there's no way we could solve it, by doing the square roots. So first, they both have an x in common, so we'd factor that out. And it is fully factored at this point. And so from here, we apply the zero product property. So this times this equals 0. So either this x has to be 0 or this quantity has to equal 0 to make this a true statement. So our two solutions are 0 or 2. Okay? Alrighty. Okay, last example. So our first step would be to put it into standard form. So we'll add 9 to both sides. Negative 3x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Then we want to start the factoring process. The first term is negative, so I know I need to factor out a negative. All three terms have a GCF of 3, so I'm going to factor out that. And that would give me negative 3 times the quantity x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Okay. Next, we need to see if this is factorable. It is. It's a basic again, so this is the easy factoring today. And what multiplies to give you negative 3, but when you add, you get positive 2. And that would be plus 3 minus 1. So now that it's fully factored, we're going to apply the zero product property. So this negative 3 times the quantity x plus 3 times the quantity x minus 1 equals 0. So one of those has to be 0. Well, there's no way that negative 3 is ever going to be 0. There's no variable with it. So that means either this quantity is 0 or this quantity is 0. So our solutions are negative 3 or 1. All right, this last page here is just to write out the steps to solving a quadratic by factoring.